All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the Washington Association of County Solid Waste Managers COVID-19 update webinar. All attendees are muted for this presentation. However, if you'd like to speak and given that opportunity, please indicate so by clicking the raise hand icon on the bottom of your Zoom webinar interface, or if you're called in through your phone, by dialing *9. If you are using your phone for audio, please use the chat section to indicate to us who you are by sharing your name and phone number so that we know which phone number belongs to which individual. This webinar is also being recorded and a link can be provided within 2 business days. The webinar will also be added to our YouTube page, which can be found at wasac.org. Thank you again for joining us today. Now I'd like to welcome Paul Jewell. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This is Paul with WASAC. You may have recognized that the voice who did the initial welcome was not Jason this morning. That is Mitch in our office. He's a new employee with WASAC, and he's just kind of learning the ropes on some of this stuff today. So I want to thank Mitch for joining us and being willing to step in and help out with some of these webinars. You may hear him a bit more often as the days go by. We've got a lot of demand for webinars, as you can imagine, for each one of our different groups, and so we're trying to share the load a little bit. That being said, if we have a couple of technical issues or whatnot today, please also just be patient. Like I said, this is one of Mitch's first ones, and he's learning just like we did at one point when we first started this. So thanks for doing that, Mitch, and welcome everybody. I noticed that we have Brenda Blanchfield on. I have not seen Matt Zybus yet, although I do see that he's logged in. Matt, you must have called in. If you could text us your phone number, that would be great. And then Mitch, I don't know if you noticed, but a couple of other folks have also been texting in their phone number. If you want to change their phone number to their name on the attendee list, then we'll know who they are if they raise their hand. Brenda, do you have any opening remarks?
Just hello, everybody. I know these are difficult times, trying to juggle your solid waste facilities and the programs and still provide essential services, but I think our work's very important. The sanitation level is definitely an essential facility or essential service. And I think it also kind of keeps people a little sane during these times to kind of add some normalcy to be able to haul our garbage to your facility. But anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's status and what everybody's doing so we can all kind of sync up a little bit.
Thanks, Brenda. I see Matt has sent his phone number in, Mitch, but it doesn't match one on the list, but there's 1425 number. Can you unmute that and see if that's Matt? Matt, I think you're unmuted. Can you hear us?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, great. Any opening remarks?
No, just kind of, I know we're up against challenging things and it will be good to see what others are up to. So with that said, let's go.
Great, thanks, Matt. Mitch, if you wouldn't mind adding Matt as a panelist or keeping him unmuted, that would be great. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the first item on the agenda then, which is a coronavirus information and update discussion with Jamie Bodden. Jamie, of course, is the WASALFO Managing Director, and she is joining us this morning. Jamie, are you on the line?
I am. Thanks, Paul, for having me. Thank you all for being able and willing to be adaptive to the changing situation. I think that's probably the most frustrating thing about this is just things are changing constantly. And so what you've heard in the news or what you've been told one day, it may not, may change from the next day. And so being able to be flexible and adaptive is really, really important. I know it's also really, really frustrating in your work life as well as just your personal life. So thank you for continuing to be that flexible and adaptive to the situation. What's going on right now in our state is that we are still seeing cases increase. That's in part because we've been able to do more testing, and we're still doing very targeted testing because our testing kits as well as our personal protective equipment, our PPE, is still rather limited, but we're starting to get more test kits and more PPE out to more counties. I know there were a few counties, and I've had this conversation with my public health directors where, you know, they were rationing 20 kits for a day, and they were able to do 20 tests, and that's just not in the big picture. In the long term, that's just not a way to be effective. So there's been a big push at the state to get more test kits and more PPE out across our state. As a result of that, we've been able to increase our testing capacity, and we're finding more positive cases. So I believe as of yesterday, all but 6 counties have had at least one positive case. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all still positive. All of the cases that have tested positive are still positive. There's been a number of folks that have recovered. There also has been a number of deaths, which is really unfortunate. But I think you're going to continue to see case counts go up. We have not peaked in Washington State, and we have not peaked in the United States. We're still going to see those case counts go up. Again, in part because we're testing more, in part because we know community transmission before the stay-at-home order was made, that a lot of people, that community transmission was happening. So what we're doing right now with Stay Home, Stay Healthy is not necessarily to prevent cases tomorrow or to prevent cases, 3 days from now. We're really thinking ahead and trying to reduce caseloads 2 weeks from now or a month from now, which is why we're being proactive now. I know it's really tough, but that's kind of the intent, is that we're trying to let the people who have been exposed and may be infected, give them the time to go through the disease and limit their exposure to other people, so that 2 weeks, a month from now, we can see a dramatic decrease in cases. One of the things that may be happening in the coming days, depending on modeling, and I don't have much information on epidemiology modeling yet. I have a call with our state and local health officers this afternoon, and then we have a call on Sunday mornings as well to go over this. But modeling is indicating that social distancing is working. It might not feel like it, but it is being effective. Whether or not it's being as effective as we want it to be, it remains to be seen. Again, given the information that I have right now, that might change. And so there has been talk of extending orders beyond April 6th in some fashion. I don't know what that would mean. I don't know what that would look like. I just know that they're starting to have those conversations of continuing this on, again, to make sure that they're able to really have that dramatic shift in caseloads. If you look at other countries that have adopted this practice, like China or South Korea, it's been about 8 weeks since caseloads peaked to when caseloads significantly decrease. And so we're trying not to have an 8-week period, but it also means that, our situation right now may be extended a little bit longer. Again, I don't know that for sure. I don't know what that would look like, but I know that those conversations are happening at the state level. So hang in there. I know it's a really stressful time, trying to continue services that are really important to our communities, as well as just navigating the challenges of doing a lot of work from home, trying to keep your family and your loved ones safe. So I really, really do appreciate the work that you all are doing in your work life, in your personal life. And I will stay on the line if there are questions throughout the rest of the webinar. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks for joining us today. Is there anyone on the line that has any questions or comments for Jamie about anything she said, or really anything else in general before we move on? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so thanks for that, Jamie. Very thorough. We really appreciate it. Let's move on down the list then. We have a couple other items that I wanted to touch bases on today. The next one is really just the essential services designation. I sent you a copy of the memo from Governor Inslee's office. Mitch, if you want to put that up there, it's the one that says coronavirus_final_W. There you go. Yeah, no, go ahead and go back down, Mitch, to page 3, where it says essential workforce, public works. Keep going. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Right there. So I just wanted to make sure everybody got a copy of this, and that you had seen the list, and point out to you where solid waste was called out as an essential workforce under public works. The last bullet point there that starts with support such as road and line clearing to ensure the availability of needed facilities, transportation, energy, and communications. And then the second sentence on that bullet says support to ensure the effective removal, storage, and disposal of residential and commercial solid waste and hazardous waste. I believe that's being interpreted by pretty much everybody as that solid waste workers and services, both public and private, are considered essential. I am curious to know if you have other interpretations, if you're seeing it different ways, or maybe there's parts of that you may or may not agree with. And if it's being handled differently in your counties. I've not heard of anybody handling it any other way than that, but I just wanted to check in with everybody today since we've got you on the phone.
This is Brenda. I kind of thought it should be its own bullet. But...
Okay. But it doesn't sound like you're interpreting it any other way than that solid waste is considered essential?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great. I see we have Glenda Steiner on the phone and raising her hand. Can you unmute, Glenda?
Glenda, you've been unmuted. You might have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I believe that the city of Seattle has or is planning to close its household hazardous waste facilities. So I'm thinking that they are going to be doing that, and I'm wondering if that's not consistent with this this provision. But anyway.
Okay. Do you have any idea? Are they interpreting the household hazardous waste not being essential, or is it for some other reason? Do they think it's more prudent to do that? For social distancing? Are they having workforce issues? Have you been privy to any of that sort of discussion?
Well, I read an early media release, and there were 2 reasons. One, their staff fell into the high risk, and then they were interpreting that keeping it open was not an essential service.
Okay. Okay, good to know. I'll see if I can get some more information on that. Is anybody else interpreting things similarly or differently? I know that you guys are looking at, and we're going to talk more in a few minutes about operational changes. I know many of you are doing some scale backs. Maybe you're eliminating drop box locations. Maybe you're eliminating hazardous, household hazardous waste or moderate risk waste facilities temporarily. Maybe you're even shutting down some of your transfer stations or limiting hours. I'm curious, again, we're going to talk about some of those operational changes, but is anyone basing some of those decisions on an interpretation that those facilities are not considered essential under the governor's order?
No, this is Brenda. I have to agree. I think it is essential service, but just to Glenda's comment, we have closed Chelan County's hazardous waste facility, but that was just for the workforce, but it did kind of make me feel uneasy that it's been, we should be open.
Uh-huh. Those are for workforce limitations?
Yes, we had to
Okay.
move our staff to the transfer stations.
Yeah, and we're seeing that actually quite a bit. I'm sure we'll talk about that more today. Any other input on this or concerns or questions about it? Any other comments before we move on? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Let's go ahead and talk then about some operational strategies under the governor's stay home, stay healthy order. I sent you a copy of something that Matt Zybus with Snohomish County had sent me. Would you put that on the screen, Matt, Mitch? That's the one that starts with SWDO. Thanks. Matt, I know you're on the line and you're unmuted. Hang on just a second, Matt, before we move on. I see there's a hand up, Mitch. A 50, well, now it's gone. Shoot.
We're just getting her number. She was
Okay.
showing us.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, Matt, I wanted to kind of pick on you a little bit, put you on the spot, because you sent this over. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was well done. And I thought maybe it could also be a good conversation starter with the group. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about some of the operational changes that Snohomish County is making?
Great. So we looked at the declaration from the governor, but I would say prior to that, we as a team were working for about 3 weeks, recognizing that if we start getting hit pretty hard in our labor force, that we would start consolidating operations and moving in the direction of supporting our transfer stations. So this is really the outcome of that work effort, and it took a considerable amount of time to come up with that. We experienced last weekend roughly, 5,000 paying customers coming through our site, probably an additional 1,000 to 2,000 on top of that who would have been just recycle only, and the interest of really protecting the public and creating social distances, we elected to consolidate our operations down to our 3 transfer stations. So we've closed down, starting tomorrow, we will shut down all of our sites, meaning our drop boxes, transfer stations, household hazardous waste. We have an environmental cleanup team, and we will also be closed all of our facilities on a Sunday. From a program standpoint, we took those staff that were kind of in the satellite locations, divvied them up into 2 teams, where one team works Monday through Wednesday, the other team works Thursday through Saturday. And we try not to have them work together. So we're trying to keep the separation of work crews in the event that one goes down. We can continue to operate with Team B at a site, assuming we can get that site up and running as quickly as possible. The big change, and I would say be as delicate as I can, in understanding that we were looking to initially, similar to what Kitsap County had done, is basically shut off self-haul, consolidate to our transfer stations, and then come back out with a program to allow self-haul customers to come back through our site. We came up with the strategy that we need this weekend to clean out our sites, to get them operational, and put in some safety procedures. Starting Monday, which would be the 30th of March, we would allow mechanical unload commercial account customers, debit card customers. That allows us to process the large volume material we come through here, minimal contact with people, minimal support to actually get them through other than loaders and laborers and a few other people. But really it's pulling back on the social interaction that we were seeing with self-haul customers. To address that issue, we are going to keep our drop boxes still closed, and starting on Saturday, April 4th, which is next Saturday, we will resume to self-haul, hand unload, debit, credit card customers only. They can only bring in a maximum of 6 32-gallon bags or can equivalents for processing, and the intent there is to basically have everyone come through, pay with a credit card, minimize transactions, get them out as fast as possible where they don't have to weigh out on the scale. So the one thing that we did, and it was kind of about the conversation earlier, how do you define what, where, when, and how as an essential service? But much to Brenda's point, we had to consolidate our operations from a staffing standpoint to make sure that we could fundamentally provide our core services. So we recognize we're not going to have green waste, we're not going to have self-haul recycling, and no self-haul MRW. So that's the big operational change, and it was one that our elected officials did buy off on, because when you keep talking about the number of transactions and then the public notifications of social distancing and stay at home, you had to balance that against it being an essential service. So if people have garbage, we'll take it, just in limited quantities. So I think that's it. It is a hardship on the community, and I get that, but we also need to be responsible and trying to make sure we're minimizing those transactions. So that's my spiel.
Sobering.
Paul, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Thanks for that, Matt. That was very helpful. I'm curious, have you gotten any sort of pushback yet from the public, number one? And I know others have. Before the meeting, Brenda and I were actually talking about that a little bit, and I'd asked Brenda to share as well. But I'm curious if you've gotten any pushback from the public, what the reaction has been. Number one. Number two, if people for some reason don't get the message and they do show up as self-haulers or with a load too large, what is your strategy? Will you simply turn them away? And I'm wondering if you've done that before and how that went. I guess those are the only two things. Just curious where you're at with that.
So I'd say public response is limited because it is so new that we moved quickly to actually implement it. And the other concern is we'll see what happens today when notice gets out that this is what's occurring, where people will start just flooding the gates to get in before we close. So I don't know public sentiment. I'm assuming come Monday morning it will be much more clear in terms of where customers are at and how they feel that the program to be implemented is one that's too draconian, and they should be able to come to the dump at any time that they want. The issue about dealing with people in things that are in excess or fall outside of that, we will have staff walking the line, for lack of a better word, as customers come up and point out what it is they're supposed to be bringing in. Anything that's grossly in excess of that, we will tell them, I'm sorry, we can't take it because of the restrictions we have in place. I suspect that that's not going to be wildly received by the public. We will allow some discretion for some period of time with my supervisors, but beyond that, it's you just can't allow people to keep doing what they're doing if we're really being serious about trying to minimize interaction and trying to at least address the issue of solid waste services, is an essential service. And if you're generating 5 bags of garbage a week, you do have an outlet, which let's not lose sight that people can also, in many cases, I can't say throughout the state, but at least in my general area, can get curbside collection. So that is always an option for them as well.
Yeah, thanks. And I'd be interested in talking with folks about any changes to their curbside as well. I had some good conversations with Brad Lovis yesterday, and I've also had some conversations with Ecology over the last couple of days that I'll fill you guys in on. 2 other quick questions, Matt. We talked over the last week or so about protective gear for folks who are interacting with the public, handling money, handling materials, that sort of thing. I'm curious, have you increased your PPE at all, or are you issuing additional PPE to folks? If so, are you having any trouble procuring that? So that's one question. The second question is, you also mentioned that you're no longer taking green waste, and you're not the only operation across the state to make that change. I'm curious as to why the green waste consideration. Maybe you could explain that a little bit as well.
So the PPE is very difficult to procure. We have someone who's in our public works area trying to help us get that. In terms of what we're trying to get is we're trying to get additional gloves, the N95 masks, and I realize we're up against some other organizations that have much more higher priority. And then we also are looking to get face shields, which are just simply the ones that are the plastic see-through. We're looking at ways to put plexiglass up between our windows when they're open, the customer transaction, and we've really put in new credit card transaction terminals that allow us to hold the credit card unit, not having to touch a customer's credit card, having them insert it, and then pull that out, and then we complete the transaction. So, I was pushing for a while to just say, get the credit card terminal outside. Operationally, there's issues with that. We're still looking at ways of potentially doing that, or doing sort of Bluetooth, some sort of remote handheld device that may allow us to also help walk the line. I think no matter, and I've got some really smart people who deal with this stuff on a daily basis who are out watching transactions, and even the site attendants who make recommendations. It's very difficult to separate when you're asking someone for a transaction in terms of exchange, to really minimize that. But we're doing the best we can. We do have scale house that have positive air, so we crank up the flow of air on that, so you keep pushing air out when you open the window. What was your second question, Paul?
The green waste prohibition.
Oh, green waste. We're really just saying it's not an essential service in terms of, yes, I get people will want to do that, but we want to minimize the confusion at the transaction. So basically, people, if they bring in green waste in those restricted quantities that we have, we don't care. We're going to treat it as garbage and just move the stuff out.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
I mean, someone could fill their bag up with, tile from their remodel, but we're really just trying to get throughput through the site to minimize contact on the site and just address the cell pole stuff. I'm suspecting things will change given our new day, and we will learn and adjust as we need to.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for that. I wanted to mention a couple of comments that I'd received that I didn't get a chance to mention before. Hang on a second, I'm looking for them really quickly. From Chris Piercy, our interpretation is that as long as the public has access to our disposal facilities through collection and junk removal services, we're fulfilling the spirit of the order. And then from Monty, and I'm gonna probably butcher your last name, Monty, Reinders. Sorry about that, Monty, from Jefferson County. Jefferson County's transfer station is currently open. It's an essential service. So Travis Dutton, your hand is up and you're unmuted. Did you have questions for Matt, or did you have something you wanted to add to the conversation?
No, I had questions for Matt. I have very, very little to add. I just was wondering where if you could expand a little bit more on closing HHW in the recycle areas, and I'm only asking in second guessing my own judgment in the sense that we have left them open since we don't want people to put these things in their garbage or put them into or dump them on the transfer station if they come in for garbage. And also, with distance and PPE, we were feeling that the recycling areas and HHW area, that we could reduce interaction, but I'm kind of curious. I guess I'm a little bit worried about the negative outcomes of closing these two facilities. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the judgment call that was made there to help me feel more confident or less confident in our decision.
So the idea of the HHW, we're looking to redeploy the staff to assist us in other operations, and it also minimizes traffic through the site. And then there are some restrictions in terms of how traffic flows through our site. So if we get a huge number of self-haul customers, we don't want to have them getting commingled with and or interfering with moving garbage out. So, I mean, our priority is to keep the participable kind of household rotting trash from accumulating in people's houses. In terms of the HHW, we're appealing to people to hold it. I don't know that that's going to be successful. The biggest stuff that we get out of transfer stations is automotive oil, fluorescent bulbs, antifreeze, car batteries, propane tanks, and the other stuff has to go to our facility here in Everett. So, yeah, it's an inconvenience for people, and they may have to hold it. They've probably been holding it for 15 years, but we're just appealing to people to not throw it in the trash.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for Matt? Okay. Thanks, Matt, for letting me pick on you a little bit. I appreciate that. Thanks for being put on the spot. Brenda, you and I were chatting a little bit before the webinar about your experience locally and some of the restrictions you guys were putting in place. Do you want to share with the group a little bit about that?
Sure. We've closed our household hazardous waste due to staff shortage. I already said that. But, we've also reduced our open hours at the transfer station, at both transfer stations, to 2 days a week. And that's the only time that public can come in. The commercial can come in throughout the week because they're already on accounts and they just have to pull up on the scales and we can just bring them in without any interfacing between the staff and the customers. So they're still open 6 days a week for that. It's just 2 days on the weekends for the public, Friday and Saturdays. It has been difficult. I'm kind of concerned about today. I've got 2 sick guys out. That's another issue is, are they really sick or are they just a little tickle in the throat? But you can't really discriminate on that. You have to let them stay home. And they haven't even gotten tested because they can't get in because they don't have enough symptoms. So it's just a kind of a fine line. So we told them no brush as well, starting yesterday. And now we're thinking, well, we're gonna have to let them through just so we don't have it clogged in. And if they didn't get the word, they're gonna be lined up anyhow. Running the transfer station with 1 guy right now because of the sick guys. So I'm actually going in to work at the scale house today and tomorrow, relieve the 1 person that's been working. I did have a question. I mean, that's that for ours, I think. So all brush yards are closed, but trying to limit, kind of feather that into people to learn that curve or learn that stopping point. Chris on your chat box said that, he considers the transfer stations essential, and they are. I don't know if at some point Chris can talk to his point on the chat box as well.
Sure. Thanks, Brenda. I appreciate that. Do we have a phone number for Chris Piercy? I don't see his name on the list. Chris, if you could text us. Oh, here, his hand's up. Could you please unmute Chris Piercy? You may have to unmute yourself, Chris. Looks like
I'm here. Well, as some of you probably already know, we took a rather bold approach to this starting on Tuesday. Our transfer stations and drop boxes and our HHW facility have not been open since the governor announced the order. So we decided to actually close down before the order went into effect. And the reason being for that was after seeing a massive amount of what I would call a run on the dump over the weekend. What we feared was that those 2 weeks or those 2 days that they would have time to come to our facilities would result in overwhelming traffic and wouldn't really support the spirit of the governor's order. So our public works director and our commissioners elected to take this approach where we shut down everything effective Wednesday morning. And mind you, it has been met with a lot of resistance from the public because we only shut down to self-haulers. We're still allowing commercial accounts in and the route trucks. And our thought in the meantime is that between residential collection and the availability of junk hauling services, that the accumulations that would result in people's residences would be reasonable and give us some time to come up with a plan to work on establishing effective social distancing at our facilities. So we're phasing in customers over the next week or 2, and we just started getting our non-account holding commercial accounts in, or So anyone with an emergent need or is considered an essential service and is a business customer is being allowed in at the moment on credit card transactions where they have to get a waiver from us. And then we're hopeful that we'll be on sort of a similar timeline to what Matt and Snohomish County are working on, where by the weekend after this coming one, we'll be able to meter self-haul customers in and alleviate some of those public health concern type residential accumulations over time. Does that answer your question, Brenda?
Yeah, thank you. So you're going to open it up to the public just for credit cards? I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
So we're still working on how that's going to look, but we're hoping that we can, particularly on the weekends where we don't have a lot of the route trucks and commercial customers coming into the transfer station, that we can meter self-haul customers in with limitations on their waste. So we won't be accepting, you know, the mattresses and couches and bulky waste, or, you know, the guy that took his deck down over the weekend. Will only be taking in, you know, mostly we're going to focus on the putrescible municipal waste.
Right, yeah, it's a very fluid decisions and such. I understand that. It'll be hard to, I see that Waste Management, our haulers, made an announcement that they're not taking any large items at the curbs. And maybe that's for another discussion here, but they're also imposing limitations like that.
Well, thank you for that. Appreciate you being willing to kind of describe what you guys are doing, Chris. I think you might have coined a new term there, run on the dump. I've heard of a run on a bank, but not a run on the dump, which is probably a good segue into the next item that we have on our list. And we can kind of go back and forth if we need to here. I did want to mention, though, that I got a comment there, that there's a comment in the chat box from Richard Dickinson with Mason County. He says that effective today, Mason County currently has all facilities open to serve our residents. We're no longer accepting any self-haulers from out of county, and they are checking IDs at the gate. We do have, it looks like, another hand up, Matt Zybus. I think Matt is unmuted, though, so go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, just as a follow-on to Kitsap County and what Chris was talking about. I mean, the logic is the same with decoupling commercial Monday through Friday and then opening it up to the public on Saturday, and getting the commercial out of there will get more throughput, where we usually have to reserve a large spot of the floor to deal with those commercial customers. So we're just trying to decouple the activity.
Great, thanks, Matt. Are there other models out there? Are people doing, you know, the same things, or are you doing other things that you'd like to share? You know, this is really an opportunity for you guys to network and kind of talk back and forth about how you're viewing things in your area. And if you're doing it differently, there are other counties who may be looking at it the same way or may have similar circumstances. So I'd certainly encourage you to share. I see Travis has his hand up again. Travis, you're unmuted, but you'll probably have to unmute yourself on your end. Go ahead.
I guess if you just wanted some updates, we're working on with Waste Connections on kind of building, for lack of a better word, an aggressive outreach plan. So right now our transfer stations are open. We do have a COOP continuity of operations plan in place for a reduction in driver and transfer station force. So I don't know if you were going to talk about curbside later, but we have a plan in place for that. But right now, all of our transfer stations are open, HHW and recycling and yard waste included. And what we're going to try to do is, especially in the spirit of sticking with the governor's message, is kind of put together an aggressive campaign for people that both can't or should not leave their house, that are usually self-haul customers. Really just reminding them that there are, you know, there's bulky curbside waste, there's drop boxes, and there's curbside options for people. So we're really trying to get people to exercise, but right now everything is open. And the one that I had that I'm really kind of curious about others too is that we have some private places that take yard waste that are contracted, as well as our transfer station, so people can still self-haul yard waste. That feels less necessary than some of the others, but we haven't really found a good mechanism to make a decision to shut them down or not. So, but right now we're still moving forward, and they've had a record number of attendees, or record attendance for drivers and transfer station workers. I think people are just happy to be able to work right now, and are interested in showing up so that if there are staff reductions that have to be made, they are picked. And then the only other last thing is Waste Connections. They did this down here in Clark County and in Portland. They have given all line staff or hourly staff a $2 per hour wage increase temporarily to help deal with additional childcare needs for their workers who have kids at home now, or any recovery of loss of income, to help ease any loss of income if their partners or others were laid off as well. So that's one mechanism they've had to kind of keep people that are on the border of uncertainty or paranoia to kind of keep coming and working. So that's all.
Thanks for that, Travis. Appreciate it. I noticed that Glenda Steiner has her hand up, and Glenda, it looks like you are unmuted, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm super interested about the wage increase and whether other entities are in fact paying their solid waste employees additional hourly wage, because this has come up with our solid waste workers. So that's a question that I have that I'd like to put out there. But on the other topic of service, all of King County's facilities are open. At this point, we haven't changed our service level, but we have implemented a practice where we are closing off at our transfer stations. We're closing off every other stall. So we're holding customers back in their vehicles and we're metering them in, and we're only allowing every other stall to be occupied for to practice social distancing. So that's what we're doing at this point.
Yeah, thanks for that. Good comments there. Does anybody have any feedback or information on the wage piece that Glenda asked about? Because that's really the first I'd heard of that, where there's been a temporary wage increase for certain workers. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands go up. If you do have some feedback about that, certainly, or you hear about it, or maybe it comes up with your organizations at some point in the next couple of days or in the future, and you want to share that information, send it to me and I'll make sure it gets out to everybody, including Glenda, so that we can all have that. Thanks for those comments. Are there others out there with more questions or issues related to operational strategies that they'd like to discuss and talk about? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I do see a comment though, that it says that from Richard Dickinson, it says Mason County, I think that's what MC means, has given all essential employees a 5% increase. And then Monty says, would like to increase wage for solid waste in Jefferson County. So far, no luck with that proposal. And Richard just followed up with, this is only for the duration of the governor's order. I don't know, is Richardson on the list here? Yeah, Richard Dickinson. Can you unmute Richard, please? Richard, you're unmuted on our end, but you may have to unmute yourself on your computer. We'd love to hear more about what you're doing there in Mason County. Okay, I'm not seeing him being, Richard, did you call in separately on the telephone? If so, if you want to text us that number on the chat box. We can get you unmuted. I'm not seeing anything yet. So are there others who have questions? Richard says he does not have audio capability. If you're on just your phone, Richard, you can do *9, and that will also give you audio capability. But if you don't, certainly do understand. Are there other questions, issues that you'd like to bring up with regard to this at this time? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so we'll go ahead and move on. But if there are issues and you think of something in the meantime, we can always go back, so don't hesitate. This is really an opportunity for you guys to exchange this information. We want to maximize that and be flexible. Let's talk about volume increases. This has been a topic of discussion really over the last week. There's been a lot of chatting back and forth amongst the members. And I love the phrase run on the dump that Chris mentioned a little earlier. That's an interesting phenomenon. It has to be because people are at home and they need something to do. So they're cleaning out their garages or the basement, doing some spring cleaning, maybe doing a bunch of yard work, etc. I'm curious to know if you guys are still seeing that occur or if it's starting to decline a little bit. We did get a chat comment a little earlier, I think from one of you. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Margot, yeah, in Skagit County, who said business is still as usual in Skagit, but we did see 100 fewer customers yesterday. I've been working with our health department to ensure we are being safe and promoting social distancing between staff and customers. So I'm curious, are others, continuing to see these large kind of record runs on the dump, or is that starting to ease a little bit? And what sort of things are you doing to cope with that, to manage that? Or if it's even an issue that you want to talk about. Okay, so far nobody. All right, I do see one hand up. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, it was pretty obvious prior to even the governor's announcement, we were seeing increased volumes, in particular with the South Hall. So yes, I think it hit to the point that people are home and they're finding things to do, and they're coming to the dump because they can't go to the movies, go to the bowling alley, or out to eat at a restaurant. Our volume of calls for our call center, which usually averages about 100 a day, probably is close to 200 to 250. And the overwhelming question being asked is, are you open? And it's an indication of people looking to do early spring cleaning or those projects they haven't got to for a very long time.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. I assume that your limitations on self-haulers to just Saturdays will dramatically change what you're seeing, right?
Yeah, that's the expectation. And then I think, we'll look to see what comes out from the governor again and what we're looking at in terms of transactions as to if it's stemming that social interaction. And I think to go back to the point early on, which is, Jamie made the point, is that there's a lot of people that are already infected and are going to the hospital. And this is really just doing things to help promote and bend the curve. So I think that's the point that I had to keep bringing home when people would question what we're doing. We're trying to be respectful of the order from the governor. And by seeing 5,000 plus transactions through my site, that's probably not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm curious, Matt, what if this continues to go for, say, a month or two? Have you thought about that? Will you change your position on that, do you think? Or do you think you guys will keep that in play as far as your restrictions?
It's hard to say. I'd say the first couple weekends are going to be the most telling. This one, of course, because we close, and then we're going to be in operation on Saturday. And we'll see what happens. If it's getting what we need, and it sounds controlling, but if it gets to really diminishing and having people come through with their household waste, we'll hold for a while and then just look for guidance from either the governor or what's being discussed here in Snohomish County.
Yeah, interesting. I do wonder, if this goes longer term, the tolerance level for the general public, right? We've seen so many changes just this week alone. Sure, go on a hike. No, you can't go on a hike because now we're closing Fish and Wildlife and DNR and Forest Service and, you know, parks and all this other sort of stuff. And okay, well, now I'm at home. Now I can't clean. Now I can't do yard work because I don't have a place to take my debris. At what point, you know, do people really start getting upset about that? So it's obviously an evolving situation, something that we're all going to have to think about and figure out a way to manage. So appreciate that.
And I realize
Go ahead.
I probably won't be the most popular person, but we will monitor it very closely. And given your previous work, Paul, you know what it's like to be an elected official. So there'll be conversations ongoing if the heat gets turned up and they start pushing on us to do other things. So
you bet. And I have a hard time believing you're not always the most popular person. That's for sure. I do have several comments that I want to make everybody aware of. Monty from Jefferson County said that they'd like information from Mason if they have successfully implemented a pay increase for solid waste. So maybe the two of you can get together. Monty also said that Jefferson is getting customers from Kitsap and trying to turn them back, which is interesting. Karma from Yakima County says that they're seeing fewer customers Tuesday and Wednesday, but the numbers are beginning to build again. Margot Gillespie says, we'll wait to see what this weekend is like. Chris Piercy says, we aren't seeing additional volumes at the moment, but I feel like I should apologize to my neighboring counties for any increased volumes they have seen. Deb from Spokane says, fortunately it snowed in Spokane Wednesday, which slowed things down, and this weekend will be an answer for any trends. And then Chris just added to his comment about other counties seeing increased volumes, obviously because Kitsap is closed. Okay, I see a hand raised from Charles Eaton. Charles, you are unmuted. Go ahead. Charles, are you there? Charles Eaton has a phone number. I don't know if you saw it, Mitch, 509-382-2534. So the fourth phone number down on the list. There you go.
There you go. I think, can you hear me now?
Go ahead.
So I was curious whether or not they're anticipating increased traffic only being open one day. We're actually looking at transitioning to 3 days. We had a record day Saturday. We're only open 2 days a week for self-haul right now. We normally go to 3 days a week, April 1st anyway. And we're thinking of holding that just to keep the volume down and scatter it over the week versus concentrate it.
Yeah, now you're Columbia County, right?
Correct.
Okay. And we had a comment earlier this week in some of the back and forth where someone else made the same comment as well. They were concerned about limiting self-haulers too much because then they'd create giant bottlenecks during those limited times. So that's not an unusual question. Does anybody have any feedback on that?
I mean, one of the other things too that we noticed is Tuesday was back to normal. So Saturday was just such a beautiful day. We think part of it was that.
Yeah. Could be, for sure.
This is Brenda.
Go ahead, Brenda.
I find it interesting that you're considering going to 3 days to spread out the public coming through the facility, if I understand it correctly, whereas we're condensed it. And I guess either way, has its reasons, but just so that they don't have to clean their hands quite so much, or the distancing is not quite so high level during those 2 days, just trying to compact it. But I can understand there's another reason to go spread it out too. That's all I had to say.
Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, we do have an advantage, I guess, in the fact that our self-haul days are different than our commercial days. So they're already naturally separated.
Right. Matt, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, and the idea with us is to limit the size and basically the quantity and reducing the transaction. So we're not getting the mattresses and couches, a lot of what was said in Kitsap County. So we're trying to restrict the actual inflow. Will we see an increase? It will be interesting to see, and then maybe if it decreases, we could loosen what it is that we're going to do in terms of allowing people in terms of quantity.
Yeah, because you limited them to 6 32-gallon bags, essentially, right?
It is correct.
Yeah. So you may see more customers, but potentially because you're limiting the volume, that could free up that bottleneck substantially.
Correct. Yeah. And we're doing the social distancing a lot, what Glenda said, in terms of stalls, interrupting, we're putting place the spaces so that people aren't so close to one another when they're inside the facility.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Any other responses to Chris's question? Or Charles' question, excuse me? Okay. Before we move on, anything else you guys want to talk about with regard to volume issues? Okay, let's move on down the agenda. The next thing I just wanted to touch bases with you on were carrier concerns, and Travis, you had kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, and we can certainly discuss this at length if you like. I wanted you to know that I had a good talk with Brad Lovis with WRRA, and I sent you a couple of letters that Brad had sent over to the governor's office on behalf of his members earlier this week. There's two of them. One of them, Mitch, I think says WRRA Governor Inslee on the tab. That one's dated March 20th, and the most recent one. There's another one on there too. It says, it's one of those other tabs up there, but probably just leave that one up, Mitch, the March 20th one for folks' reference. They've got quite a few issues that they want some consideration on from the governor's office. They were very interested in making sure that solid waste operations were considered essential. Obviously, the governor did follow through with that very consistently with the national trend. So that issue seems to be addressed. We did have a good talk yesterday, and some of these issues are in this letter. They have some concerns about some of the closings of transfer stations that they're seeing and how that's happening rapidly. He said, while that's a concern, they do understand kind of the fluid nature of this issue, and that sometimes you just need to react that quickly. But it is causing a few struggles for them. They do have contracts that require flow control to certain areas, and so it does bring up issues where they've got to now divert waste from one to another, perhaps, and how does that coincide with their obligations under the contract, et cetera. They're starting to see some workforce impacts, and so they're looking for some hours of operation from a commercial driving standpoint being relieved. They're also looking at medical waivers and things like that for renewals being relieved temporarily during the pandemic response because of those workforce issues and limitations with state agencies who are reacting to the pandemic. They're finding it difficult to get those things done. They're not seeing a lot of workforce issues yet in the more urban areas, although they anticipate that they may see some moving forward. Where they're really starting to feel some of the workforce issues are in the more rural areas where they have a lot more limited folks, drivers, carriers, et cetera, even some of their operators. In some cases, they may only have one or two, and if one of those goes down, that obviously doubles the workload for the other one. So they're starting to see some of those impacts. He said that Washington MRFs are being considered an essential service, he believes, although that is not true in other places like California. They've been shut down, evidently, in California. I know this is an issue for Oregon as well, and Travis sent over some information yesterday from the WRRA counterpart in Oregon, which is ORRA, They are bringing up a lot of the same issues with their governor and their legislative committees and others. The MRFs are running into some PPE issues. I'm curious to know, we did touch on that a little bit with you guys too. Are you running into those also? And they're getting some of the same labor concerns that the carriers and other operators are starting to see. Obviously there's material handling concerns, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. I've got some information on that for you too. And then finally, well, not finally, there's actually a couple of other issues. WRRA is reaching out to locals with regard to their local ordinances on flow control and other things. They're trying to be very communicative as this thing progresses and as changes need to be made. They ask that you be willing to be flexible with them. They're not trying to get out of their contracts. They're just trying to temporarily ease some of the regulatory burdens so that they can be flexible and make sure that they're getting the job done for their communities. They are concerned about contaminated materials. They say so far you guys have been pretty good in making sure that you're coordinating when they know they're picking up contaminated materials, or I should say materials from contaminated locations. And so that's been going well. They ask that continue. They may need to discuss with you about timing and even local ordinances and statewide ordinances on weight limits on roads. If they have to consolidate routes because they've got issues with employees as far as workforce, then they may have heavier loads coming in. They may have mixed loads coming in, and they'll want some flexibility there. They're also talking about some timing on different types of products. If we start to see some issues related to recyclables and other things, secondary markets, et cetera, they need some regulatory relief on some of those things too. And then finally, he did mention that they're looking forward and considering whether or not their members may need some financial support through the stimulus package. They're concerned about lost services from closed businesses, closed commercial accounts, and things like that, and how that may erode the profitability of their businesses. They're also concerned about non-payment from customers. They don't want to be not picking up garbage if this continues for a longer period of time. And they know that a lot of people out there are unemployed. They're concerned about non-payment from those curbside and maybe some business customers and how they might weather that non-payment while continuing to operate. So that's some of the stuff that they're thinking about. Are you guys hearing anything else? Are you hearing anything different that I haven't brought up today? Travis, I know you've been working with the Portland metro area. It seemed like a lot of these issues were really consistent with what you sent me yesterday. And I'm happy to share that with other folks as well. Mitch, can you unmute Travis Dutton and give him an opportunity to add anything? He's towards the bottom of the list there. Travis, you might have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
You bet, go ahead.
No, I think the only thing to add is, and I put it in the comment box so you can ignore my comment if you see it, but one of the things that we discussed in Oregon was how to help understand the realities versus the perceptions of increased risk. We have statements from the regional health directors, we have OSHA and SWANA directives talking about collection, bulky waste, coming in contact with these kind of things do not put them at an increased risk, that solid waste providers are not at an increased risk of contracting this by being out in the public as long as they're not doing anything. But the perception seems to be largely why in Oregon, Waste Management has suspended bulky waste, and it sounds like they have up here as well in some places. They want to provide containers for bulky waste instead of leaving it just out. But so one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how do we help with that perception, given that our medical professionals have given us clear direction that this is an okay thing to be doing, as well as kind of questioning the fact is, do they have ample supply of containers and carts for all of the things that they're trying to tell us that they want customers to do instead? So do they have inventory of carts to handle all the potential bulky waste that they might be dealing with, or any pickup services? But so we've heard one thing from our health professionals, and they have seemed to have a different opinion, at least in the letters and the communication that we've gotten. So I don't know where that's coming from or how we kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah, that's interesting. What are others hearing? Thanks, Travis, for that. I'm curious to know, are others hearing a lot of the same things? Do you have the same questions? I did send you also a letter from Waste Management. I think that was one that you had sent me, actually, Travis, to just kind of highlight some of those issues. I think it was from Hillsborough. Pretty sure it was to someone in Hillsborough, actually. So if you want to take a look at that, that's on your documents list. Charles Eaton had a comment. He said, this appears to request authorization to break contracts and divert waste to another facility. And as the county engineer, I'm extremely concerned about them increasing weight on vehicles when I have weight limits on roads and bridges due to recent flooding. Certainly big issues. Charles, did you want to expand on that? We just had him unmuted, Mitch.
I just can't
I don't see, yeah, I see him
Yep.
on the list there. Do you see him?
I'm here now.
Oh, go ahead, Charles.
So yeah, I mean, it's, I understand if facilities are closing and stuff, but it seems to be too broad a brush, just for blanket weight increase request. I mean, basically, if they had increased requests, I'd have to deny them access to certain areas of the county right now under our historic flooding. We have over $5 million in damaged road infrastructure into flooding issues in February, and then get hit with this on the back. We're close to breaking as it is.
Yeah. What we had talked about with what Brad and I had talked about were really just general things. I assume that your carriers will be contacting you on an individualized basis. He just wanted to, I think, highlight some issues that they're seeing as possibilities. Obviously, in your county, you guys are not closed, you're open, and so that may not be an issue for you.
Right, and I guess I'm just concerned that from a organizational structure that we, make sure the governor knows that we don't want broad brush work that doesn't necessarily work in every county.
Understood. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Charles. Other questions, input, or discussion on this particular issue?
This is Brenda. I have a question about Brad's letter saying he had issues with getting the medical permit or medical waste permit, was it? I missed that.
Are you talking about the March 20th letter?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's in the letter. You were explaining it. I didn't quite read all the way through the letter, but I thought there was something about their concerns about getting the medical waste permits. Do they have to have medical waste permits, or maybe it was just permits? I know in Chelan County we do have some flow control, and so some of those they're having a little issue with that when we divert them, but
yeah, no, it wasn't medical waste permits. I think what I was talking about was medical waivers for drivers. So they have to get their physicals as part of their CDL,
right,
and their medical cards, and those expire, and so they got to go back in for checkups, right? That sort of thing. And so they're having trouble. They didn't want to burden the healthcare system while they're reacting to this. The state agencies that are also in charge of that have been busy and don't necessarily have the ability to get these things done right now too. So they were looking for just temporary exemptions from renewals for that sort of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Other questions? Matt Zivas put in the chat box that he agrees with Charles on the blanket policy. We need to keep things locally controlled. Totally agree. Other questions or issues you'd like to bring up with regard to carriers? Okay. We're making it down the list here on our agenda. That's great. The next thing that we wanted to talk about was local solid waste financial assistance, which isn't really related to coronavirus. But before we get into that, I did have one other thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to put on the agenda, and that is, one of the things I've been doing as staff is not just putting together these webinars for you guys and for others, but also trying to really pay attention to what's going on across the state, both for you guys and for the other groups that I work with from a policy point of view on, how people are handling things, what issues are coming up, et cetera, et cetera. And as part of that, what I've been thinking about is kind of the regulatory timelines, the regulatory commitments, and deadlines that you guys are facing right now, that if this emergency declaration continues for an extended period of time, if you'll be able to comply with those, or if we need to think about asking the governor for regulatory relief. When I'm working with my planning group, there's a whole host of different things, right? They deal with a lot of permits, they issue a lot of permits and decisions, and there's also a lot of appeal timelines and things like that that I've been looking at for them. For you guys, the one thing that I primarily came up with was really your comprehensive solid waste management plans. And are any of your programs going to be kind of in an update mode with a deadline that could get caught up in this emergency declaration? I know that you've got to involve your solid waste advisory committee. You have to consult with cities. When developing those plans, there's usually some sort of public hearing involved, which could create also additional challenges with meeting timing constraints and requirements. And I reviewed that statute. I didn't really see a lot of implicated jurisdictions, at least right now. If I'm wrong about that, I'd certainly like you to tell me, because we are going to be preparing some sort of request to the governor around regulatory relief for counties, and we want to make sure that we include everything that we can. Are there other things out there that I also need to be paying attention to that maybe I'm not aware of? For instance, you guys have monitoring requirements that maybe aren't in statute but are in contracts with the Department of Ecology or others that you're going to have a hard time complying with for open or closed landfills, for instance? Are there sampling issues or requirements that we need to know about and we should ask for short-term regulatory relief around? Anything like that that I'm not aware of would be really, really helpful. Can you guys think of anything?
Well, didn't we just have that rule where we're supposed to update our plan for contaminations by 2021? Was it? Sorry, I'm not quite as privy to it. Sorry, this is Brenda. And that's going to require public meetings and such, right? So.
Yeah, trying to remember, you have to update your plan by 2021. So there was the bill that had to do with composting, but that didn't make it through.
Okay, wasn't there the contamination element, or?
Oh, you're talking about for recycling. Yeah, that's true. We're waiting for ecology to put together a work group for us to work on that, because you can build your own plan through your update, or you can just adopt the state's plan. Remember, and our strategy was to try to get the state to adopt a plan that most of us could live with, if not all of us could live with.
Right.
So I'll check into that one. That's a good point. Yeah, Megan says the contamination reduction and operation plan, the crops, and Margot had the same comment. Other comments?
Hey, Paul.
Yes, Matt.
Well, we have our facilities, this is a bigger picture, but NPDES compliance in terms of water. And then I'm assuming many jurisdictions have an annual report requirement for closed landfills. So we could look at things that would say, here are the critical things we will do, such as management of gas, meaning, doing to make sure you're not building up an explosive landfill out in the middle of nowhere. I think we need to think about, do we go to suspend quarterly monitoring where there's a requirement for that and just do it twice a year or maybe once a year, given the unique circumstances and the staffing levels that we have?
Okay. Are those contractual obligations, Matt, or are they statutory?
The NPDES is it's more from our surface water group, so it's an overarching municipal permit. We have industrial permits as well. And then the groundwater or landfill monitoring is a requirement under state law.
Okay, so that's a legal requirement. Okay. Okay, great. Others? Travis Dutton sent in a comment, says, I'm very concerned about being able to spend LaSWIFA dollars with our current agreement. It's heavily dependent on outreach to the public and campaigns that are not critical right now. Additionally, it requires getting time with our council to approve bigger projects, and this is going to be very difficult to accomplish. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. Travis, you're not the only one that has that concern, I'm sure. Rory just forwarded me an email that I had not gotten, and this was from Ecology. It says, during the COVID-19 outbreak, the Washington Department of Ecology will continue to respond to spills, provide technical assistance, ensure permit coverage for regulated activities, and enforce the laws that protect the environment throughout the current crisis. However, we recognize the public health crisis and economic disruptions related to the outbreak and may temporarily affect some of the regulated entities' ability to comply. All state requirements remain in effect, but Ecology will exercise reasonable discretion. I'll send you this email as well, and I'll try to get to the bottom of that a little bit more. Other thoughts? I'm not seeing any other comments or hands raised, and that is fine. Just keep that in mind. If something comes up over the next couple of days, and you think of something, please let me know, because I'd like to, again, try to make sure that as we put our request together to the governor, it can be as complete as possible. And that if there's some sort of regulatory burden that you're really going to have a hard time complying with, that we try to ask for some relief on that. Okay, next thing on the list, and really kind of the last thing, and I know we're running a little behind on this, sorry guys, is our LaSWIFA update. I wanted you to know that we have responded to the Department of Ecology that we prefer the baseline for the additional distribution of 170,000, so from 100 to 170 for local programs. So everybody will get another 70,000 essentially, and then the distribution will be based on per capita population. So if you refer back to that chart that I sent you last week, you'll see what your actual new additional revenue amount will be. I sent out that survey, we got several responses, and by far the overwhelming response was to go with the $170,000 base. So if you have any questions or concerns about that, certainly let me know, but we have communicated that to Ecology. I do have some feedback for you and some information for you on their supplemental fund disbursement plan. They believe that the governor is going to sign the budget no later than April 4th. And once that happens, the money will be immediately available. You don't necessarily have to wait till July 1. So you can go ahead and start using that funding as quickly as possible. We think it's in the best interest of our group and you as members to get the funds obligated as quickly as you can. One of the conversations that we had with Ecology, with the LaSWIFA work group, was that they're actually seeing revenues come in lower than what they had budgeted for this year. And so they're concerned that there may be a budget adjustment at some point that takes back some of that money. As you know, your contracts are written that the state will provide the funds as long as the funds are available, and they have the ability to remove those at any time. They may decide to do that if the projections continue to hold and the actuals come in lower than what was anticipated. They do that less likely when the funds are already obligated. So if we can get our contracts signed and our funds obligated as quickly as possible, you're less likely to see your funding reduced. That's a good thing long-term for us. Politically, we've struggled very, very hard over the last several years to get this funding back to where it is right now. And you have to remember this, extra $7 million that was provided during the second half of the biennium actually translates into an extra 14 million as we go into the next biennium. So we'll go from 17 million to 24 million. And if we don't spend down our funds, the legislature is going to look at that pretty hard. And they're, the first thing they do is go, well, if you didn't spend the money, obviously you don't need the money, and they'll try to reappropriate that somewhere else. That's an outcome that would be very bad for us long term. So we need to make sure that we don't let that happen if possible. One of the ways that we can do that is to get this money obligated as quickly as we can. Local governments, meaning you guys, need to start thinking now about how you can use that money. And this speaks directly to Travis's concern that he brought up. You want to think about how much of the new available funds you will request. If you're not going to spend them all, then don't request them all. Let Ecology know how much you're going to relinquish to a partnering organization, because we want to make sure there's maximum opportunity for unspent funds to get utilized by someone else. You want to notify Ecology if you're going to add a new task to your contract. So the funds can be used for existing tasks on the contract, or you can add a new task to the contract to amend your scope of work. If you do have something new, there'll be new outcome measures. You need to adjust your outcome numbers, and you need to update your spending plans. Now, Ecology is going to send an email to all of you requesting that you respond by a certain date. Now, they don't have that date set yet, but they're anticipating somewhere around April 8th. So it may be fairly quickly. And I know, that's probably not convenient, but we do need to prioritize spending of this money and making sure that we get it obligated as quickly as possible. They're going to use those responses to amend the agreements, determine the unrequested amount, figure out how they're going to redistribute that unrequested amount, so that other folks can get the opportunity to request those funds if they can. Now, with regard to amending your agreement, a couple of things to remember. Funds are available for reimbursement, again, as soon as the amendment is active in their online system, Eagle. So you don't have to wait till July 1st. You can start using that money as soon as your amendment is active. Funds can be used to reimburse costs retroactive all the way back to July 1st of 2019. So if you have done, maybe you fully expended the previous allocation on items that were in your funding agreement, but not only did you spend that, but you spent more, you can retroactively apply that stuff. So there's some flexibility there, and you might want to get creative in how you do that. You can use the funds, as I mentioned, to add a new task and to pilot homeless encampment cleanup. So that's another item, especially in the urban areas. If you want to pilot some homeless encampment cleanup, you can use this money for that too. Now, there are some pros to adding a new task. And those are if the tasks say, maybe you're adding a task to your contract that was actually operational all the way back to July 1st of 2019. If that's true, then it would be easy to spend the funds because you can retroactively apply for those expenses. But you should also think about whether or not you want to add a new task, because there are some pros for not adding a new task. For instance, if you don't add a new task, you'll get the quickest amendment possible on your agreement. You'll be able to obligate those funds as quickly as you need to. And again, getting them obligated fast, I think, is key here. Now, Travis mentioned or had a comment that that his money was heavily dependent on outreach to the public and campaigns that are not critical right now. And additionally, it requires getting time with our council to approve bigger projects, and this is going to be very difficult to accomplish. That's absolutely correct, and I think everybody should probably be thinking about that. Travis, you definitely are thinking about that, and I appreciate that. I know it's going to be a struggle to use this money, but it's really, really important that we do. Politically speaking, if we don't use these funds, it's going to look bad as we go into the next session and try to justify that we're going to need them. I know that we're under an emergency declaration. I know this is causing problems for everyone. I just don't know how the legislature is actually going to view that, especially given the fact that this new funding is retroactive to July 1st of 2019. I just don't want to lose the momentum and the victory that we've gotten here. And it just doesn't affect us. It also affects our environmental health partners. And if Jamie's on the line, I'm sure she can comment about that too. But I just wanted to emphasize with you guys, it's so important that not only we obligate these funds as quickly as possible, but also that we utilize them fully so that we can make sure that we preserve that funding moving forward into the next biennium. This is still not where we were back in 2013, right? Our previous high watermark here was 28.6 million. This is close, but it's still almost $5 million short across the state. It's 24 million. So we've got to find a way to not only keep what we have, but if we're going to try to get back to where we were or even increase beyond that, that will be a very hard thing to do if we can't utilize this fund. I don't know if others have anything to add to that. Matt and Brenda, I know both of you are on the SWIFA work group. I don't know if anything, if there's other things that you want to say about that.
Well, this is Brenda. I can say that that is kind of a push. We want to get those contracts signed and secure those funds for each county. In my situation with the hazardous waste facility or the MRW facility, and it's being shut down. Of course, Peter Lyons brought it up at the LaSWIFA meeting that there's concern because that's what my grant was for. And now we're not spending the money there, although my staff is on standby. I'm not sure if that's even qualifying. So I'm probably going to dedicate another task for like brush chipping, ensure that we utilize all of our grant funds, and hopefully that can be expedited.
Hey, Paul, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
This is Jamie. One thing that we're thinking of at the local public health level is how do we get grant funding that we are potentially leaving on the table because of COVID response to apply or be approved as an allowable expense for COVID related activities. So a good example of that is immunization grants. Immunizations aren't related to COVID response, but we're working on getting that particular grant approved so that we can utilize that grant in our COVID activities so that we're not essentially leaving money on the table and dipping further into other funding sources. I wonder if, given that you all are greatly impacted by COVID and have really changed how you do business, if we couldn't work with ecology to think of how we could use that additional funding for this biennium and get it approved as, in response to COVID. Just an idea I'm throwing out there because we're working on that with other things for public health.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea. We probably have to look into the MACA statutes and make sure that there's some way for us to design the contract that's consistent with the legislation around the program and what the funds can be used for, but I'll look into it. It's a good idea. Other thoughts, questions? I see there's a hand up. Travis, go ahead.
Oh, shoot. What was I going to ask? Is there any way for us to be using, so one of the things we're looking at is using solid waste funds in order to offset some of the potential future cost increases. And I just was wondering if there would be an opportunity for us to kind of expand some of the applications for LaSWIFA dollar reimbursement in the future if we need to do certain things to keep our system viable and alive in this whole thing. I guess more response dollars. I don't know if that would even be an applicable use for LaSWIFA funds.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of what Jamie was talking about there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So
Yeah. So I'll do some research into that, see what I can come up with. Okay. The last thing I wanted to follow up with you folks on, first of all, thank you for that. Thank you for your responses on the SWIFA funding. If you have thoughts about that or other ideas, please let me know. And for sure, make sure that you get those funds obligated as quick as you can and as flexibly as you can. If we get any more information on how we might be able to use them for response or other things, I'll certainly let you know. I did want to follow up with you just really briefly on some of the research that I've been doing with regard to materials handling. You guys had some questions before about how long the coronavirus lives on certain types of materials and surfaces. I spoke with Lori Davies at Ecology about that, asked if they were going to put together anything on their website or any sort of guidance about that. She said no, she felt like that was more of a Department of Health function, which she's probably right about that. I was just wondering if they would have any material handling recommendations going up. She said no. I did some looking into it. I'm glad Jamie's still on the line because I don't want to get this wrong. There's a lot of information out there. Some of it looks pretty reliable. Some of it maybe not so reliable as to how long the virus is viable on certain types of surfaces. There has been reported within the last couple of days a new study from the New England Journal of Medicine that looked at plastic and stainless steel, copper, and cardboard. I don't know why copper, and I don't know how useful copper is for us, but they looked at those things. For plastic and stainless steel, the study shows that 2 to 3 days is really how long the virus can be viable on those types of surfaces. It's most stable for those 2 to 3 days. Copper, only about 4 hours, and cardboard about 24 hours. Important to note that the amount of viable virus decreased rapidly over time. So the longer period of time in that 2 to 3 days or 4 hours or 24 hours, depending on your substance, the farther down that line you get, the less viable the virus is. That's the most recent study that I've seen. There's other research out there that shows on metal, glass, and plastic that the virus can live for 9 days. Or up to 9 days, but there's a lot of question about, the viability about that, about it over time. And then I found another one that, looked at the cruise ships that had sick people in them, and they were finding on some of the surfaces there virus, 17 days later. But again, a lot of question about whether or not it's viable to the point where it would get anybody sick. I don't have any other information than what I've been able to research with these basic studies here. I didn't know if you had any more information, Jamie, that you might share. Maybe Jamie's still not, maybe Jamie left.
I'm here. Sorry, I was on mute.
No, okay. Is that information accurate, Jamie, or is there anything else out there that you know about?
Yeah, I would say that's the science is indicating that. I would also really reinforce that contact, picking up a virus from touching something that has the virus on it is not the strongest way or the most common way by far to get infected. Direct person-to-person contact, that's why that social distancing 6 feet is so critical. That is the most common way. And so yes, it's there, but it's not it is by no means the most common or the most easy way to pick up the virus. And I would say that if people are, putting things like hospital clinics and things, they're using a whole different process to reduce biohazard material, and they're going through that process for anything that's coming from a clinic. So you're most likely to do something from somebody who's quarantining at home, who most likely is not symptomatic or has mild symptoms, you know, the likelihood of things surviving that you would need to be concerned about, for the most part, pretty low. And if you're already limiting, you know, the larger items that you're taking at solid waste facilities, that's going to further reduce it. So yes, it's a risk, but I think in terms of other sources of where people can pick up the virus, not high on the list.
Thanks for that, Jamie. We did have a comment from Becky People at Douglas County. There was the research that I looked at that I mentioned where it showed some of the cabin surfaces on the cruise ships where they were finding virus, you know, 2 weeks later, for instance. Do you know about that information? The research that I did said that there were trace amounts and folks were they doubted very seriously anybody would get sick from anything as far as the viability of the virus to actually infect someone at that point, being that old. Does the science back that up at this point? And do you know what types of surfaces those were? I assume it was either wood or plastic or something.
Yeah, I don't know what surfaces those were. My guess is that it wasn't just, you know, what was living in the cabin with the people staying there. My guess is that cruise ships do not have closed circulation systems and utilize negative air pressure and use common HVAC systems. And so that when you're thinking of isolation and quarantine for folks, especially in a healthcare setting, you're utilizing negative pressure practices, which is really directing the flow of air in one way and not recirculating air, and increasing the likelihood that a virus is being carried from room to room to room. My guess is that that is not the practice on a cruise ship, and I would say that that's probably more of a reason why they were finding things like that several days and weeks after the cruise ship.
Okay.
Was that recirculated air? And
just another good reason not to go on a cruise ship. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for that, Jamie. I appreciate it. Anything else to add? One of the questions that we did get before was, you know, how long does it live on paper? I wasn't able to find any really good information on that. Cardboard was the closest thing I could come up with, so. All right, well, that's all that I have for you today. I noticed that Matt had to drop off. Is there anything else that folks wanted to bring up before we adjourned? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'm not seeing any comments. We do have another webinar scheduled for next week. In fact, I've scheduled several throughout the month of April, always on Friday, always at 8:30. And so as things come up, we'll be putting them on the agenda. It's another opportunity for you to get updates and to share about, you know, what's going on in your county and some of the challenges that we're all facing and the way that we're addressing them. Thanks for attending today. We really appreciate your participation. Hopefully you got something out of it. We did record this, so if you would like to refer back to it, just let us know. We can make sure you get a copy of the recording. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out at any time over the weekend or during the week, etc. If you need information, if you need some assistance, if there's any way that we can provide better service. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for the work that you're doing. Take care of yourselves, take care of your employees, stay healthy, wash your hands, and have a great weekend. Signing off. Thank you.